I know that it would be kind of cheesy to do this, but I'm so tempted to start this week's episode with yet another trigger warning. Not because the subject matter in this particular episode is as dire as it might be in some others where we've invoked the mystic trigger warning, but because of fans. In my part of the world, and potentially yours as well, the temperature today has been over 100 degrees. And even though, as I record these words, the sun has now set, it's still in the 90s. I am fortunate enough to be recording this in a place that is air conditioned. However, when it gets this hot, the air conditioning can't quite keep up, and I'm forced to run not one, but two fans. When I record, I normally turn those off, but today that's just not going to cut it. And I think it might be traumatic for both of us if I were to faint from heat stroke in the middle of a sentence about Babe Ruth. I'd be talking about that time that he ran into the wall at Griffith Stadium in Washington. You know the one, you've seen the picture, and you'd be wondering, was that a sound effect or was that Steve? I mean, the Babe was knocked out. Maybe he's really into method acting. As a podcaster with high professional standards to uphold, I am deeply offended by the idea that there would be fan noise in the background. However, this is an ecological disaster that we're in the middle of here, so I hope that, unlike me, you are not too triggered, and you will forgive me. I'm going to run this thing through some filters that usually take that sort of thing out, but I can't promise it will be perfect, or that the resulting damage to this recording won't have me sounding like Donald Duck. Who's to say that wouldn't be a better and more entertaining program? However, if I do my job correctly, by the time you hear this, this trigger warning will seem like a lot of unnecessary falderall. Nevertheless, I just wanted to say that to you so we're all on the same page in terms of the sound quality this week. As always, thank you very much, the management, and now let's get on with the show. I'm okay, really. I'll just do the show from down here on the floor. We are coming up on the 87th anniversary of what remains the most memorable thing to ever occur in baseball on the 4th of July, Lou Gehrig's farewell. That occurred on July 4th, 1939. The Yankees had over 60,000 fans in the big old ballpark in the Bronx. That cannot happen today. As part of the Day of Recognition for Lou, they had a reunion of the 1927 Yankees, and that can't happen today either, sadly. I'd like to see them try, though. Ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please. Please welcome back to New York, 136 years old, Urban Shocker. That would be Urban Shocking, especially since his bad heart meant that he'd been dead for most of that time. The poor guy checked out just shy of his 38th birthday, not quite a year after the 1927 championship. He even beat Miller Huggins out the door, and that fellow was in a hurry. Call me cynical if you like, but another thing I expect wouldn't happen today would be that anyone so unlucky as to be hit by a terminal diagnosis as Gehrig was would have the grace to say, "Today I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth." Maybe Lou took that spot. Maybe no one else can have it. Maybe forever after, everyone else who would be honored with such a day in similar circumstances would just have to be like, "No, I reject this. Not me." And you know what? You couldn't blame them. There's a reason that everyone has wondered ever since, what did Lou know and when did he know it? I don't know if it would change the way I feel about what he said, but I guess for some people, they would look at his courage in that moment and rate it a little differently if he did know that he was doomed and he said that he was the luckiest man despite that, or if he was still in some form of denial. I shouldn't say denial, I should say ignorance, because there's a possibility that Eleanor, his wife, and his doctors conspired not to let him know the full extent of his illness so he wouldn't be destroyed by it before he was destroyed by it. And certainly there are still extant letters that he wrote to his doctors. "I thought you said I might get better because I'm not feeling any better, and I was hoping, can you tell me when I might start seeing some progress here?" And I'll give you a quote in a minute that suggests that as late as spring 1940, he was still looking for that. When Cal Ripken Jr. broke Gehrig's consecutive games played streak in 1995, Joe DiMaggio was there. Joe and Lou were teammates for 4 years, so Joe was a witness to what on July 4th, 1939, Lou called a bad break. In 1939, Joe had been the third youngest member of the team. He was 80 in 1995, and he was one of just a few living members of the club. Shortstop Frank Crosetti, then about 85, was still around, as was right fielder Tommy Henrik, 82, and first baseman Babe Dahlgren, who was 83. It would have been pretty interesting to have Dahlgren there at Camden Yards, given that he was the player who had the miserable, thankless job of stepping in for Lou on the day that Lou was forced to sit down. Watching on September 6th, 1995, I was struck that during the tributes to Gehrig, the normally phlegmatic DiMaggio was weeping. At the time, I wondered if his tears were for Gehrig, whose own streak ended not with this sort of celebration, but with him in the dugout quietly sobbing. Maybe DiMaggio was weeping for his own youth and imminent mortality. Maybe his mind cast him back almost 60 years to when he was only 24, and so many adventures were still ahead of him, and he was reliving it all. He had so much time ahead of him then, in inverse proportion to how little Gehrig had left. There was only one great adventure left for Lou, and it wasn't the kind that anyone would have sought out. Perhaps he was thinking of something more obscure than July 4th, 1939. On April 24th, 1940, the Yankees hosted the A's in the Bronx. Red Ruffing pitched against the very large lefty Herman Bess. Might have been Bessa. This is yet another player name that I've never heard pronounced. Besse. If I've just mispronounced your surname, please forgive me. It wasn't Red Ruffing's best day. He allowed 10 hits, 2 walks, and 4 runs, including a 2-run homer in the top of the first to right fielder Wally Moses and his amazing eyebrows. But he still went all the way and got the win. This was because Bessie, and 3 relievers just didn't have it. Henrik homered. Red Rolf, not normally a power hitter, hit 2. Future Hall of Fame second baseman Joe Gordon hit 1 as well. Joe D that is, was not in the lineup that day. Henrik played center. Joe missed the first 2 weeks of the season because his spikes caught as he slid into second during the final exhibition game. He strained a knee ligament. I'm, pardon the expression, torn between saying he was lucky that it wasn't worse and guessing that it was worse, but they just couldn't image it back then. In either case, he returned in the 16th game and ultimately played in 132 games, hitting .352, .425, .626 with 31 homers and 133 RBIs. He won the batting title. By Baseball Reference's wins above replacement, he was the best position player in the American League at 7.1, although pitchers Bob Feller and Bobo Newsom, yes, Bobo, finished ahead of him, while on the position player side, he was trailed not terribly closely by Hank Greenberg, Ted Williams, and the aforementioned Flash Gordon. That spring, Gehrig had told writer Bob Considine that he didn't miss playing. "It's hard to explain," he said, "but when the old sting goes out of you and you can't burn that ball and drive it out there, well, you just don't want to play anymore. When your body no longer can do the things your mind wants to do, there's just no more incentive. I haven't the least desire to play ball right now. Maybe next year, if I recover, I'll want to play again. Not that I will. I thought when this thing happened, I'd miss baseball like hell. But it hasn't turned out that way, at least so far." Considine asked Gehrig if he intended to show up at the ballpark for opening day. He said no. "Too many people," he chuckled. "I guess it wouldn't be good for me to get pushed around in a mob. No, I'll wait until some quieter day. I haven't seen my old locker since Mr. Barrow decided to always keep my name on it. That was a wonderful thing for him to do, don't you think?" Lou did show up eventually on what was indeed a much quieter day, a cold, rainy Wednesday that brought the game I just described. The Yankees' average home attendance that year was 13,013. Remember, the Great Depression was easing off then due to rearmament, but it wasn't over. There were no night games in the Bronx. They played weekday day games. If you were working, you weren't going, and so on. But this game drew only 2,575, perhaps due to the aforementioned weather. The Yankees might have called it, in fact, but they were about to leave for Boston, and they didn't want to go in cold in the figurative sense, even if the conditions in the Bronx meant that they were leaving cold in the literal sense. Gehrig slipped quietly into the stadium, the New York Times reported, after most of the fans had gone to their seats. He entered by the clubhouse door, visited the players in the locker room, and then, a signal distinction, sat on the bench alongside the board of strategy, Joe McCarthy, Art Fletcher, and Earl Coombs. Without overcoat or even a vest, the Iron Man ignored the penetrating cold that had fans and warmly clad players shivering. The New York Herald Tribune added that Gehrig loudly applauded 2 backhanded stops by his successor, Babe Dahlgren. No one made a big deal about that visit, and if there were photos taken of Lou that day, I haven't found them. He was just there and gone. I didn't know about that visit back in September 1995 when Joe DiMaggio saw Cal Ripken Jr. pass the Iron Horse, but it occurs to me now that not only was Lou on the bench that day, but so was the injured Joe DiMaggio. Joe might have watched him watching on the outside looking in, and maybe he was too young to get it by then. But by the time he was 80, he surely did understand what Gehrig had experienced that day. Joe had one foot in the present, one in the past, but he was entirely inside the infinite inning. And welcome back to the show, Infinite Inning number 382, in an ongoing series. Collect them, trade them, but don't stick them between the spokes of your bicycle. I don't even know how you do that. It's all digital nowadays. I remain Stephen Goldman, as ever, your congenial host for this trip to the past, on a mission to better understand the present, the time machine being the old game of baseball, the national pastime, or is that passionate nap time? No, wait a minute. Well, I mean, your nap times can't really be passionate, can they? That's a separate activity. I suppose you could be passionate about nap time, and certainly if baseball games are inducing that passion in you, then there's something wrong with either you or the ball game. I will admit that there were some matchups when I was a kid. Put the wrong Pirates team inside the Astrodome, where the Pirates brought in someone like Marvell Wynn as the cleanup hitter, into a ballpark where the ball didn't travel, and it was all turf, and the other team couldn't hit it out either, and there was no pitch clock, and it was just 3 hours of 6-3 grounders. I mean, I love the game. I've watched a lot of bad baseball games, but those were some to avoid if you could. But then I was a teenager and one who stayed up late to watch the Twilight Zone when he had to get up at 7-something to go to school, so I tended to get nappish in the afternoons anyway. I'm going to progress quickly here because, as I said, it is hot as heck in here. It's hot as heck everywhere. Around the world, even glaciers are crying, "Uncle!" Little did I know, watching Superman the movie in a theater in 1978, that Lex Luthor's grand plan to drop the coasts off the continent so cheap inland areas would become expensive beachfront property, that by now we would start to achieve it ourselves through meltage and ocean rise. That was fantasy back then. Now Superman remains fictional, although we kind of need him more than ever. The Lex Luthor stuff, that's all true. Lex Luthor owns most of our major corporations. Lex Luthor is building data centers. Lex Luthor is saying, don't worry, we can trash the planet. I'll take your kids to Mars. I believe that's what the Pied Piper told the Germans hundreds of years ago before he jiggity-jigged their children off to who knows where. They're still looking. Have I asked you how you're doing? How are you? I hope you are finding ways to stay cool and in ways that are safe, because you read about how overseas and other places, folks are jumping into unsafe bodies of water. If you think about it, even your bathtub can be unsafe under the right circumstances or the wrong ones, and not all of them are coming out again. So please take care. And certainly, if you go out, take a lot of water with you and duck inside as often as you can. I lost a colleague many years ago at Baseball Prospectus. I've talked about this often on the show, and I remain traumatized by this, not just because he was a very intelligent and smart fellow, but just because he essentially went out for a hike on the wrong day. The temperature shot up, he wasn't wholly prepared, and he never made it back. And it was exactly these sorts of circumstances. So please, I can't spare you, and I'm sure that there are a lot of folks out there who don't want to spare you either. So stay hydrated. Staying hydrated, physically and mentally, is perhaps the theme of this 4th of July episode of The Infinite Inning. And as long as we're on the subject of Lex Luthor and obscene amounts of wealth, this week, and this is explicitly a non-baseball note, in light of yet another Supreme Court decision saying that restrictions on the way money is spent on political campaigns is a violation of the First Amendment's right to free speech, please allow me to remind you that the court has repeatedly made a category error. Money isn't speech. Speech is speech. Money is a tool. In a democracy, your voice and, say, Jeff Bezos' voice, or for that matter, Lex Luthor's voice, should have equal weight. That he can purchase a bigger megaphone, Lex I mean, with his dough, so that he can drown you out or gain access that you are not able to obtain is not his free speech. It's a suppression of yours by other means. Leveling the playing field in this regard is an enhancement of free speech, not a denial of it, by opening the town square to all and keeping it open, not a suppression of someone else's speech. The law the court invalidated was also meant to prevent bribes passing through to a candidate via the candidate's party, but oh well. The Supremes also continued to turn transgender people into second-class citizens, destroyed the idea of independent agencies, except incongruously and hypocritically for the Federal Reserve, and just barely retained the idea of birthright citizenship, even though the plain meaning of the language in the Constitution is right there. Some of them said the founders couldn't have anticipated illegal immigration. Well, guess what? They couldn't have anticipated automatic weapons either, but that doesn't mean that you're going to let us repeal the Second Amendment, does it? Sigh. This week at Baseball Prospectus, I wrote something called Happy Birthday, Here's Your Damned Cupcake, also kind of about the 4th of July, also about Kate Cavalli's use of the word boy towards Wilson Contreras, sad birthday celebrations, the time Bill Dickey broke Carl Reynolds' jaw during a 4th of July doubleheader at Washington in 1932, the subject of an episode here approximately 270 episodes ago, and much more as we build up to the nation's 250th. It's also about 1890s players stepping in front of pitches from a man named Pink. He had a brother named Blue. What a wonderful world we used to live in. I thought about telling that story here, actually, but for some reason I felt like it fit better there. I'm still kind of questioning it. I mean, part of the theme of it seems to be bad things emanating from Washington. I don't know if that was a bad thing or an amusing thing, and I might well have made a mistake in that regard, but if you read it, I hope you'll enjoy the story, because ultimately, sometimes the things that make us great are the things that also make us make mistakes, and vice versa. Our virtues are our flaws, and unfortunately, you kind of get one with the other. So in that story, when these Washington Senators, this is the early National League Washington Senators, the team that was folded in 1899, was trying to get hit by Pink Hawley's pitches, that was unsportsmanlike, and it was against the spirit of the rules. And yeah, it's also kind of amusing, but that American spirit of, I'll do what I want, I don't like the conventions here, so I'm lighting out for the frontier, also makes it difficult for us to generate something like community spirit and empathy, because we are so individualistic and self-regarding in many cases, frankly. I'm trying to think of an analogy for one's virtues being identical to one's flaws, and what's coming to me, and I don't know if this is perfect, but think of an elephant or a rhinoceros, these big animals that are beautiful and powerful, and also they only make one baby at a time, long gaps of time apart. And that's because the environment can't support that many elephants or that many rhinos. They have to consume so much food that if they made as many babies as rabbits do, a habitat denuded of vegetation and then starving elephants. So what even is the point? And so evolution has prevented them from being in that situation. Conversely, when humans come around with pointed sticks or guns, then Mr. and Mrs. Elephant can't keep up the population, and eventually the elephants and the rhinoceroses, as some of them already have, disappear altogether. And so what makes them great in one way makes them weak in another. And here's another thing that I'm thinking of, and this is just fiction, but the John Ford, John Wayne film, The Searchers, in which John Wayne's rugged individualism means that he can go out and do these hard, violent things to protect his family, but it also renders him unfit to be with that family or anyone. And as I said, that's fictional, but it also reflects us. That's why it has power. Finally, before we take a break that is pressing down like we were all paninis on a grill, since this is a short holiday week, I had a short holiday run of Dead Player of the Day posts. I added Pete Runnels, two-time batting champion, who nevertheless got no respect, and multi-time AL walks leader Topsy Hartzell. You'll never guess what famous American novel his nickname came from and why he had it. By which I mean that within about 3 words of my explanation, it should be painfully apparent to you why. And to just tie Cade Cavalli's boy with Topsy Hartzell, the more I think about our country, the more I feel like everything, even the good stuff, and some of it is very good indeed, has in some way been in response to race. Any direction you pick, it's there. It's our national sickness. And it started with Christopher Columbus and just went on. And as with Columbus, it often ends in violence. I'm not saying that other countries are better. They're not. They just have different histories and different pathologies. That's what my column is about. I guess that's what the Topsy Hartzell post is about. And to some small extent, it's what the rest of the show is about, but not in the way that you might expect. A quick personal note, you know how at the end of the trigger warning I said I'd be doing the show from the floor? Something like that actually happened to me when I was in the 7th grade. My social studies teacher, who was prone to lecturing at great length, was doing just that when I dropped my pen to the right of my desk. I leaned over to get it, and somehow the desk unbalanced, and all 3 of us, my notebook, the desk, and me, just went down in a cloud of paper, and I'm just lying on the floor, and all the other kids are looking at me, and I just stayed there. And I looked up at my teacher, who was sort of smiling down at me a bit smugly, and I said, "I'm fine, carry on." And he said, "I can't." I said, "Why not?" And he said, "Because if you don't get up, they'll be paying attention to you, not to me." Well, here on the Infinite Inning, that's exactly what I want. So I'm going to stay right here. And I hope you will too, so that we can all be together again on the other side. I should have mentioned this on the other side when we were taking care of various bits of show business, but this episode is going to go out about 24 hours earlier than it usually does. I don't know if it will turn out to be any longer or shorter than a typical episode, which of late has run between 50 minutes and the usual hour. However, I would like to try to get the show out on Thursdays from now on instead of Fridays. I've been mulling that over for a long time. I think I can accomplish it. And it's simply because I have the sense that people would like it better and listen more. I'm really one of the few or only podcasts that releases on essentially Saturday morning. I've had that day to myself, but I think that it causes people to overlook the program. And I realize this is a late date. I think we started out more midweek back in the early days, but just the way that my own schedule is structured, I somehow drifted to putting the show together Friday nights and stuck there. And no one has complained, and some people have complimented me on it, but the fact is that I don't think it's the most practical thing in the world, both personally and professionally. And I think that most people who are in this field would tell me that I've been an idiot these last 10 years, because part of the way that the algorithm works on various podcasting platforms is about downloads and how many people find it and stick with it on release day, I mean. And then they promote it more when it seems like it's getting attention. And if I'm minimizing that due to the release day, even though it seems to me that the nice thing about podcasts is that you can time shift them however much you want, well, maybe I'm hurting this effort of ours. It was kind of a clue to me that the reissue episodes were actually doing better than I expected them to do, and that might just be because I was releasing them midweek. I intend to get back to doing those once this tranche of Dead Player of the Day posts is concluded about 9 players from now. And I'll do something else with the Patreon group, although I've not decided what yet. I'm open to suggestions. All of this is not about my wanting to short any of you of any content whatsoever, but just about time management for me. So if anyone has any suggestions or any comments, you know that you can reach me via the Facebook group, via Patreon, via infiniteinning@gmail.com, and, as I'll say again at the end of the episode, at Blue Sky. I'm happy to hear from you, as you know. Moving on, this is not a wholly developed story, but simply some observations appropriate for a very special 4th of July. I've mentioned before that this year has brought the 150th anniversary of the National League, which was the founding point for the entity that eventually called itself Major League Baseball, and everything that has come since, and has provided the tapestry that gives the game so much meaning beyond who wins any given contest in any given day, because essentially with all that history, what, just to pick a player at random, Mookie Betts does on a random Thursday evening game is in conversation with what Maury Wills did, or Pee Wee Reese, or Bad Bill Dallin, or any of the Dodgers shortstops, Linus Frey, going back, marching through time all the way to the beginning. But even what I just said is too limited, because it's not just Dodgers shortstop to Dodgers shortstop. In Mookie Betts' case, and honestly, I wasn't intending to say this, but he's in conversation with Cap Anson too. And at the opposite extreme, what he does has more meaning in relation to Jackie Robinson. But it's not just about the part of baseball that orbits around race, which is a lot of it. It's every single aspect of it. The way we play today, the way they played then. We could be talking about physical conditioning. We could be talking about the ballparks. We could be talking about the way soft drinks are served, labor relations, the way that Joe DiMaggio was discouraged from having an agent, the way players who tried to have agents early on were blacklisted, and compare that to the state of labor now. In that sense, a Dodgers game can be just a Dodgers game, but it's also a culmination and a reflection on everything else, and it deepens because we acknowledge that part of it. I'm not saying it's wrong just to look at it and go to the ballpark and have a hot dog or 10 and enjoy whatever happens and sing Take Me Out to the Ball Game in the 7th and so on. You can experience it on that level too. But when you let the legacy in, it becomes so much more than that. It's almost biblical with begats. The Babe begat DiMaggio, and DiMaggio begat Mantle, and Mantle begat Judge or Mattingly or somebody. Speaking of begat, Charlie Silvera was for years the Yankees' backup catcher, even though he never played. They carried 3 catchers, so either he or Ralph Houck was sitting a lot, plus Yogi Berra almost never got hurt, never missed time. One of the most durable catchers ever. And Charlie went to manager Casey Stengel and he said, "You know, Casey, people are saying you only keep me on the roster because I'm your illegitimate kid." And Casey said, "Nah, that's not true." And then he thought about it and he said, "Well, wait a minute. Was your mom ever in Kansas City during the years?" Charlie told me that story himself, but by the time he got to that part, he was laughing so hard that he never did finish. I imagine that that's what happened when Casey started going in that direction as well. Silvera actually wasn't from the Kansas City area. He was from the Bay Area in San Francisco, and was just one of so many Italian Americans who populated the game back at the beginning of the 20th century, Joe DiMaggio, who we've referred to frequently today, being another. The original National League required that a city have a population of at least 75,000 to qualify for membership. The country was about 1/7 as large back then. I think the population overall was about 50 million, whereas we're probably around 340 million now. And there are about 350 cities that are over 100,000. And so if we could just invoke the old National League standards, we could drop teams in Davenport, Iowa, and Toms River, New Jersey, and give the Green Bay Packers a sister team in baseball. Not that population is the deciding factor now. You'd think that television market would weigh in first. Back then, though, no mass media, and what a team could get through the turnstiles was how much it made and how much the visitors made as part of their share of the gate as well. The National League teams in 1876 consisted of, in order of standing, the Chicago White Stockings, who became the Cubs, the Hartford Dark Blues, very specific, who ended up the Hartfords of Brooklyn, incongruously, before going extinct, the St. Louis Brown Stockings, who also became extinct, with the American Association's St. Louis team later joining the National League and becoming the Cardinals, the Boston Reds, who we know as the Braves, the Louisville Grays, who folded within a couple of seasons, the New York Mutuals, who did not become the Giants, the Philadelphia Athletics, who also quit after a year and were ancestors to neither the Phillies nor Connie Mack's version of the A's, and finally the Cincinnati Reds, who went 9-56 but still soldiered on for a few years. Our current Reds, like the Cardinals, began life in the American Association. This was the league of Cap Anson, orator Jim O'Rourke, Deacon White, Harry and George Wright, Al Spalding, and Candy Cummings, all of whom were later awarded plaques as pioneers in the Hall of Fame, an institution that didn't come along for another 60 years or so. It might be that the non-Hall of Famers are more interesting. We've talked on the program before about Louisville's pitcher Jim Devlin, who went 30-35 that year, leading the league in losses, but with a 1.56 ERA, he pitched 66 complete games in 622 innings, and about a year later, was permanently banned for throwing games to gamblers. It went rough for him after a while, but then he got a job as a cop, because I guess he knew his way around bad guys. I'll just leave that without further comment. There were just wonderful stats, dinosaur stats, like Devlin's, Ross Barnes, Charles Roscoe Barnes. It was only 150 years ago that the second baseman, Ross Barnes, and his mustache hit .429 for the Cubs in 66 games. That's all the games the Cubs played that year. 154 games or 162, both of those didn't come along till much later. It was the fourth time in something like a full season by the standards of the day that he had hit over 400. He also hit 21 doubles, 14 triples, and 1 homer, leading the league in runs, hits, and doubles, triples, not to mention walks, and all 3 slash categories. Not that anyone knew that back then. They were just looking at batting average. He was 26, and as I just said, he'd been doing that sort of thing for 5 years, going back to the beginning of the National Association, the predecessor league to the NL. He was a master of the fair foul twisting bunt. However, note those doubles totals and triples totals. He wasn't just plinking the ball off to the side and watching it curve towards the stands. He was taking some good hacks at times. So why isn't that guy in the Hall of Fame? This is, simultaneously, a baseball story, a Cubs story, and an American story. Well, right after that, right after the season I just described, 429, 462, 590, he was washed up in 1877 when he was 27. Now, first, the National League banned the fair foul bunt. The owners wanted batters swinging away, but as I just said, he was doing that at least some of the time. Second, and more importantly, he got sick. No one knew exactly what was wrong, but the effects were chronic, and he just no longer had the energy to play. He kept trying for a while, but he was basically done. It didn't kill him right off or anything. It just ended his athletic career. There were so many endemic diseases. I feel like I say tuberculosis every single episode. I could talk about typhoid too. Those are bacterial diseases, but as you know, if a virus gets into you, it can start doing some wacky things to your DNA, and you might guess he had some early version of something analogous to Epstein-Barr. Maybe he got bitten by the wrong tick. I mean, that's a problem today too. It might be more of a problem now than it was then. And so Ross Barnes, who was dominant in early baseball, is not qualified for the Hall of Fame because he played sparingly during the 1877 season. That was his 7th year. 1879, he tried a comeback, didn't take. 1881, tried a comeback, didn't take. That was it. He had 9 seasons in. You need 10. Now, you may want to, but actually me, and say, but Addie Joss is in and he didn't have 10. Nope, he died mid-career in his 9th season. But somehow, in 1978, the Veterans Committee decided to make an exception for a fellow who'd been gone since 1911. Well, Barnes has only been gone since 1915. You'd think that Joss's constituency then would be very similar to Barnes's constituency now, which is to say none. If you can make an exception for tubercular meningitis, you can make one for unknown disease, maybe long COVID's great-grandpa. I don't know. It doesn't matter. As I've said before, Barnes isn't going to experience it. He's beyond that. There's no such thing as completing a museum or telling the full story. No museum is large enough to do that. That said, it would also be kind of fun to have this guy who hit 400 4 times in there. And it would be a good teaching moment in the way that Addie Joss can be a teaching moment too, because America is one of the few only first world countries that doesn't really have a government-backed safety net in terms of health care. And every single one of us is Ross Barnes until we're not. And Ross Barnes woke up on opening day, 1877, with a career .398 average. And what happened to him is really no different from a person suddenly going blind or walking into their place of work and having some machine hack one of their hands or feet off, and suddenly they can't do what they had been doing at 26, as happened with Ross Barnes. Now, it seems that he was okay financially the rest of the way, but he had to think fast about what he was going to do with the rest of his life, I imagine. And not everyone has the ability to fall back on, well, whatever education he had and find another way. I'm going to guess that even then, office work might not have been easy for him, because if he was chronically fatigued, and it sounds like he was, then, well, those of you who have experienced anything like that, you know that dragging from the car to the office, it's not easy just to sit at your desk and do figures, which is what he did. At least at the time of his passing, he was a bookkeeper for the People's Gas, Light, and Coke Company. He never married. And I don't know, maybe he never met the right person, maybe he wasn't interested, maybe he was ace, maybe he was gay, I have no idea. And I don't think anyone else does either. But whereas we might be totally wrong, it's also not unreasonable to guess, particularly if we are trying to say something to ourselves today, that he just didn't have the get up and go to go out and get someone. And so he spent the next 38 years of his life alone. This is the same player of whom, in his memoirs, Cap Anson said, Ross Barnes, who held down the second bag, was one of the best ball players that ever wore a shoe. And I would like to have 9 men just like him right now under my management. He was an all-around man, and I do not know of a single man on the diamond at the present time that I regard as his superior. So I say to the class, when you have someone like that who is brought low before their time, before they're able to take care of themselves, to have earned all the money that they might have needed out of their skills to see them through the kind of illness that they ultimately contract, what do we as a society do? Do we say, that's a bad break, pal, so long? Even Lou Gehrig got treated that way by the Yankees. Once the 1939 season was over, they said, that's it, time to get a real job. Is that the right thing for a people to do to other members of the community? And I'm not going to make a case beyond that. You don't need me to. I'm talking about if we were educating children. If we were talking to a 4th grade class or an 8th grade class or a 12th grade class, we should ask, what do you do? What is the right thing? Should we provide anything to Addie Joss's widow and his children? Should we provide anything to Ross Barnes, who is still alive and in theory can shift for himself, but it might be hard and he can't do as well as he used to because he's a victim of a chronic illness? Or is it right for us to do nothing? And then you just sit back and you let the children talk. In just a moment, I'm going to sit back and let a break talk for a moment, but let me just mention one other thing, that in a very small league in 1876, about 10, 11 players per club, there were about a dozen players who were born not in the United States, but Ireland, plus a couple who came from Great Britain, one from Canada, and one from Germany. Direct immigrants were probably not quite 10% of the league, but I'd imagine the majority of the rest were first-generation Americans. We fear this today, and they feared it then too, immigrants, outsiders. But it's also who we are, and who we always have been, both sides of it. The newcomers who refresh us, and those who fear the newcomers. On the other side of this break, I hope we'll tie this all together with an unlikely figure appearing as part of the baseball story. You'll stay with me, I hope. So I keep listening back for that fan noise and I'm not hearing it, but here's the odd thing about that this is obviously not our first summer of doing the program, and I've been in this position before, and there have been times that I've heard the noise and had to take it out, and other times that I've not heard it and released the episode without making any changes, and then when I've gone to do the reissue episodes, I play them back and it's all and I say, what was I thinking? And at that point, I put the tracks through the wash in the digital audio production software, and usually that solves the problem. There are many other problems that come up because nothing about this is easy for some reason. And it's very funny. I go to Reddit sometimes, and there's a podcasting group. I imagine you don't want to hear this, but very briefly. And a lot of the talk is, what is the best software to make podcasts? And everyone has their favorite, and every favorite has flaws. And it really just comes down to what you're comfortable with, because none of them is really optimal. At least that's my conclusion. In summary, I really hope you're not hearing any fan noise, but trust me, I've tried it without it. This was almost my first topless podcast. That is not something anyone should try to visualize, nor should it be titillating to anyone. But I have one small one running. I have the aforementioned software filtering those frequencies, and yet things happen. Once again, I thank you for your patience. Here in this final segment of the episode, I wanted to mention that 2026 is the 150th anniversary of something else that happened in 1876. That is the Battle of Little Bighorn, or the Greasy Grass, depending on which side you were on, or are on, I suppose. Custer's Last Stand. Lately, Turner Classics Movies has been running John Ford's Fort Apache from about 1948, starring John Wayne and Henry Fonda, which is well timed. It's one of his cavalry trilogy, and if you've not seen it, I recommend it. The film isn't quite a direct take on Custer, but it borrows elements from his story in that Fonda plays a martinet of an officer who just won't listen to experts and is determined to be both hostile and condescending to the Native Americans, with consequences. I'm not going to give you the full background on the government's war against the Sioux or Custer's campaign or even his death at their hands, which included his entire command being wiped out more or less. Some of that was due to his own sloppiness and impetuosity and ineptitude, some to his relief pitchers letting him down, possibly intentionally, because he was kind of a jerk. I'm also struck by the fact that the goal of the army was to force the Sioux back onto their reservation. And what is a reservation but a really big concentration camp? But most of all, apropos our oft-cited belief that baseball is everything and everything is baseball, allow me to quote from the August 1906 issue of Sporting Life. And please forgive some of the language that's in here, but it's of its time. Sitting Bull Jr., son of the famous Indian chief, is a baseball umpire and has given up the tomahawk and the scalping knife to don the mask and chest protector to judge the diamond plays. He is as good an umpire as his father was a fighter. There is no playing with him. When he makes a decision, it goes. Amateur teams have the inclination to kill the umpire more times during a game than any professional team, but none of them has ever had a desire to kill Sitting Bull Jr. He is a large Indian, even when compared with some of the giant members of his tribe. "I never thought I would hold an indicator on a baseball diamond," said Sitting Bull. "I started to be a referee in lacrosse games and finally got to holding the indicator for the Indian teams near Fort Robinson. Then the colored regiment near Fort Valentine had 2 ball teams, and I held the indicator for them. Now I am an enthusiast in the baseball game and take as much interest in the game as the bleachers." 16 years earlier, his father, the victor of Little Bighorn, had been assassinated by the United States government, along with one of his sons. Sitting Bull had more than one son, and I don't think any of them were actually called Sitting Bull Jr., so it's your guess as to which one got into baseball. If any, by the way, it's not impossible that someone was just passing themselves off as Sitting Bull Jr. Who would have known any better? The black regiments, which he referred to by another term, later supplied the basis for the Negro National League. There have been numerous players of whole or partial Native American background as well, including the Hall of Fame pitcher Charles Bender, the slugging first baseman Rudy York, and the Yankees' great Allie Reynolds, just to name a few. We could keep going. Jim Thorpe, Jack Myers, Elon Hogsett, Lou Sock Alexis. Time homogenizes us if we let it. To some people, homogeneity, that's a scary word, but it's not really up to us. Nothing in human existence has ever been static, including who lives where, and tides of people sweep from east to west and west to east, north to south. I'm sure I'm leaving out a few compass directions, but you get the idea. You know the song Istanbul, not Constantinople? That's what that's about. There were Viking settlements in Russia and Russian settlements in California, and we could just keep spinning that on. But it's not only about settlements, it's about amalgamation in the peaceful version and conquest in the scarier version. And it's okay to be scared of that because that's part of the story too. But you have to have the judgment and maturity to know which situation is which. Amalgamation is not conquest and can be managed if you're intelligent. No one is born an American. They may be born here, as uncomplicated as that seemed until a couple of days ago. But we take those babies and educate them into being an American. If you remove that same baby to Fredonia and taught him or her to worship dictator Rufus T. Firefly, that baby would grow up to be a Fredonian no matter what they look like. And you know them Fredonians can be kind of funny looking, or at least funny sounding. Sometimes they even break into song, but the point is that all of this is a natural process that is part of history, and if you don't get too scared of it, then you can adapt it to your own purposes and to your own benefit. Is it always a good or happy thing for those involved? No. But there are forces impelling us that we can't see because we live in the midst of our particular time and we just don't have any perspective on it. I suspect, though, that when these forces move humanity into great migrations and you try to resist them, there are only so many routes you can go. Some of them are very evil, and many of them end up with something very different than what you intended. It would be smarter to adjust. And I'm not saying that because I'm some hippie liberal with kind of fanciful Pollyanna-ish notions of how things work out, but simply because I can read maps from different periods of history and ask, why isn't Istanbul Constantinople? Why isn't everywhere basically what it used to be? But on a far simpler level, look at the town around you, just the town around you, wherever you are right now, and think, could I vow, even if I had the power of a mayor or a president, could I vow this place as it is now will always be as it is now? Every building, every street, every person, the ethnic mix, who is with who, we're going to put that in a snow globe and freeze it. And it's not going to change. I defy time. I don't think anyone has ever done that. And if, again, you want to but actually and say, well, let's try France. France has been like white Catholic guys going back to, I don't know, the year 1000. Yeah, kind of. It's not that long. Oh, and they murdered or massacred their way out of a few schisms, more than a few, along that road to the present. if that's who you want to be, then that's what it's going to take. Just look up the quote, "Kill them all, God will know his own." That's French. But yeah, you can move the goalposts around and adjust the time scale and say, well, New Jersey's been New Jersey since 1650 or so. Yeah, ask the Native Americans who used to be here. What always strikes me about Custer's fall is that it took place on June 25th, 1876, a little over a week before the country was about to celebrate the Centennial. The Grant administration held back the news because it was felt that it would cast a pall over the birthday party. It would have, and it should have, but we've never been honest about ourselves that way. Now we're about to mark the semi-quincentennial, is that the right word? Our 250th birthday since the Declaration of Independence, since we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. I was just a lad when we marked the bicentennial in 1976. We can talk about baseball that year next time if you like. George Brett and Mike Schmidt and Bill Madlock and Hal McRae and so on. The Big Red Machine. Can't leave out Joe Morgan, the most valuable player in baseball that year. But for the moment, I just want to say a quick word about the year itself. And I imagine that a lot of what I recall as enthusiastic participation was just marketing. I remember seeing a bunch of images derived from Archibald Willard's painting, Spirit of 76, everywhere. You'll know this image when I describe it. It was created for the Centennial exhibition in Philadelphia in 1876. Baseball was part of that too. In the last season of the National Association, 1875, the Philadelphia team played under the name Centennials, the Philadelphia Centennials, and they were awful, going 2-12 and then giving up before the schedule was anywhere near complete and going home. They gave it up as a bad job. Again, sometimes it's a sincere celebration and sometimes it's just merchandising. The painting sort of falls somewhere in between. Again, I'm sure you know the image. It's kind of cheesy. It features 3 musicians, 2 drummers and a fifer, marching through the middle of an active battlefield like idiots. One of the drummers is a boy, another an old man, and then the fifer, who just seems to be sort of a standard adult, is wearing a bloody bandage around his head because, again, he's standing in the open and presumably was nicked by shrapnel or something. There's a uniformed soldier dying at his feet, and the fifer's eyes are bugged out. He's freaking out, and the old man is too. What are we even doing here? And the boy looks up at the old man as if asking, "Are we going to die, Grandpa?" It's smoky, there's carnage, and yeah, the American flag is waving in the background, and I guess the point is that the army is marching on, and these guys are leading it, beating the drum so they can keep going to their doom, I suppose, or win. It doesn't seem like they're winning, though. We probably lost more battles in that war than we won. We just happened to take the 7th game, that's all. The painting became iconic and has been adapted and parodied a million times. My absolute favorite version, and you saw this one a lot in 1976 as well, was the July 1939 cover of Mickey Mouse magazine. That would have been on the stands at the same time that Lou Gehrig was saying goodbye forever. Artist unknown, cover price 10 cents. Willard's 3 figures have been replaced by Mickey Mouse, not drumming but holding a flag, Goofy, pounding spoons on a kettle, and Donald Duck, blowing a fife. He has a bandage on his head, but it's not bloody, so it looks more like a do-rag. All 3 seem pretty happy to be there, and the background is blank, so presumably they're just marching in a parade. If the spirit of 76 was to keep playing despite the desperate circumstances, the bullets and the bombs bursting in air, the spirit of 39 was, it's safe now. This is just a party. And even if it's not safe, and it isn't, not always, we've retreated into a fantasy world anyway. And you know what? 50 years later, we're still there. Once again, if you are going out to celebrate the holiday and you are in a part of the world that has been turned into an easy bake oven, please party smart, party carefully, and stay cool. Should you wish to be cool by following me on social media, you can do so at stephengoldman.bsky.social. You can also write us, by which I mean me, at infiniteinning@gmail.com. And as ever, there's a Facebook group. Simply go to Facebook, search on Infinite Inning, register your thoughts. I would like to hear them. Should you wish to support the show, and I very much hope you do, please visit patreon.com/theinfiniteinning. And on that note, I would like to welcome Michael. Thank you very much for joining up, Michael. And thank you to all. Gear of a rudimentary kind available at the-infinite-inning.creator-spring.com. I added a couple of baseball caps this week with our 2 major logos on them, or 2 of the 3. Will they come out well? I haven't gotten the samples yet, but I'm hoping so. Original soundtrack available gratis at casualobservermusic.bandcamp.com. Finally, should you find yourself with the proverbial moment to spare, go to the podcatcher of your choice and rate, review, and subscribe. And if your podcatcher doesn't let you do those things, hum this theme song, this fanfare at them until they capitulate. And speaking of that theme song, it was a co-composition of myself and Dr. Rick Mooring. We wrote it together, and then we probably went out for pizza. And whereas I can't speak to the quality of the pizza, the quality of the collaboration was top-notch. And Dr. Rick says that was also the best pizza ever. How can you not remember that? You really don't care about me, do you? Well, if I can patch things up there, I'll be back next Thursday from now on with more tales from inside the Infinite Inning.